Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Germanicus, Rome's Unlucky Prince, is a fascinating new study about, I think, one of the great what-ifs of Roman history. The gentleman who has written the book, Rome's Unlucky Prince, is Alessio Perry, and I'm delighted to say that he joins me live on the line now. Good morning to you, Alessio. How are you doing?
Good morning, Giles. I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Where are you standing on the steps of the Senate? Are you looking over the Eternal City? Where do we find you today?
Well, you find me in grimy England. I'm afraid, it's classically raining, so I'm afraid nothing so romantic as the Spanish steps of the Senate or anything like that.
So what is your interest then? I'm a professor in history. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I did my BA in history at the University of Pisa in Italy, and then moved to England, where I did an MA in archaeology at UCL. But I've been dealing with Roman history since I can remember, really. And I've kept doing it also independently after I left university. Right now I focus more on teaching, actually. I'm actually teaching languages, mainly Italian. But this is a long passion of mine, and I've never really left. And that's why it kind of came to life with this book eventually. So
set the seed, if you will, because we kind of have this sort of mixture with sort of the Roman period. And if you're not fully embedded in your history, you tend to think it's all sort of one moment it's Julius Caesar, then it's sort of I Claudius, then there's the war at Hadrian, and the next thing you know, the Goths have sacked Rome, and it's all gone completely wrong. And if you have had Russell Crowe saying, are you not entertained? But there are so many periods, there are so many families, the actual thought of the Roman Empire itself, because spoiler alert, it doesn't finish in the 4th century. So explain a little bit about what period we're talking about. So is it Republic? Is it Imperial Rome? What is it?
Sure. What we're talking about here is what historians tend to call the early imperial period, meaning these are about the first 2 centuries of the empire. So roughly from what the kind of famous 0 year, which actually doesn't exist, but anyway, around Christ's birth, up to the end, basically, of the death of Commodus, the notorious son of Marcus Aurelius, the wannabe gladiator and so on. But in this particular instance, so the book is set in the very, very early imperial period. So it's what is called the Augustan period and the reign of Augustus' successor, Tiberius. So it's roughly about, say, around 20 BC to 30, 40 AD. So these are kind of the rough times and period in which the book itself is set. Because this gentleman, Germanicus, was the kind of, it's kind of convoluted, as you may imagine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Julio-Claudian family.
This is the most powerful family. This is a noble Roman family, basically, and they have massive clout, yeah?
They do. They were a family who transformed in these sort of 70, 80 years of rule from a noble family to the first family of Rome, which is very interesting because this is an exact period where today we take for granted a lot of notions about the empire, like an emperor having sort of veto powers and being able to take all the decisions he wants and blah, blah, blah. But at the time, it was not as clear-cut. This was a period of transformation where the family members themselves sometimes did not know what was going on, in the sense that they were still behaving like private citizens, but in a way where it was not matching their status really anymore. And this created issues and frictions at the time and kind of contributed to their usual, how you want to say, gloomy reputations in later Roman historians as well. Because unfortunately, a lot of the majority of historians that have talked us about this period do come from at least a century after the events by which point the empire and the figure of the emperor had already kind of like, how can we say, like assumed different connotation. And therefore, people.
By that time, the emperor, we're looking at emperors as deities, aren't we? But basically, we are.
Sort of. I mean, in certain parts of the empire, Alicia, not yet in Rome to some point, but let's put it like this: like in 150 AD, it was quite clear cut what an emperor could and could not do. It was not like this in 15 AD. And this created a lot of friction. Later on, a lot of historians could not understand this kind of Roman historian, I should point out, could not understand this difference at the point. Like the most famous of all is Tacitus, which has left out probably the most picturesque account of these events, of this period. But they could not understand certain things, certain behavior were not as defined as they had become by the time he was living.
Now, obviously, the Roman Empire is vast. We tend to look sort of west, don't we, when we look at the Roman Empire? We can just think, oh, okay, well, it's, it's Gaul, it's the Rhine. Obviously, as Brits, it's the conquest of Britain. But again, we have the whole eastern side of that as well. So we're going down to Egypt, Antony and Cleopatra, etc. The thought of how you actually sort of manage the empire, because obviously there's no internet. He can't pick up the phone and say, what on earth is happening in, what on earth is happening in Galilee? What are the Persians doing these days, etc., etc. So what's Germanicus's background? I think obviously the name is obviously something of a clue, but is he young military from a great family? Does he go off to the wrong? I mean, explain to us a little bit about his power base.
Sure. Germanicus moved about the empire in general because he was a son of generals. So his father Drusus was the brother of Tiberius, who became then emperor later on. They were kind of echelons of a great republican family, who then got, because of their mother Livia, who married Augustus, the first emperor, they were able to then maintain this sort of high clout and important commissions by Augustus, and were sent about mainly carrying out his kind of military conquests later on, especially when Augustus got older. So Drusus, Germanicus' father, was sent to Germany. He managed to conquer a whole area from today modern Rhine River to the Elbe River. So it's quite not close enough to Berlin. I don't actually know the distance, but it's pretty east. And that was all vaporized basically by the defeat at Teutoburg in 9 AD by Armenians. So the whole area went off, and the border of the empire, Augustus decided to retreat it back on the Rhine River. But obviously, these Germans, the Germanic tribes, were still kind of causing a problem, even though Augustus didn't want to expand the empire beyond the border anymore. This is where Germanicus comes in. So he first started his first kind of military adventures were under the generalship of his uncle Tiberius up in Germany, where he was leading sort of like smaller sections of an army. And after Tiberius became emperor in 14 AD, Germanicus was still in the area because there had been also he was preparing for a raid into the German territories. But at the moment of Augustus's death, the legions on the Rhine River rebelled. And so he was there just in time to quell the rebellion, and then later on move beyond the Rhine River and have this raid into Germanic territory.
Here's the thing, because we tend to think of the Roman army as being all, again, Russell Crowe, all centurions. It doesn't work like that, does it? It's a composite army. There are fighters brought in from all over the place, from different regions. You'll have some Germanic tribes fighting, alongside you as auxiliaries. So why is there a rebellion? Is it just because they want to go back to Tuscany and run their hands over fields of corn with Ridley Scott playing in the background?
I'm afraid it's all about money.
Yeah.
Basically, as always, especially at the very beginning, like that. Every time an emperor died, it was a very kind of delicate period for any successor, because these people were simply trying it out, literally, to try and get more subsidies, more money from the new emperor. So basically implying, I'm going to give you allegiance if you pay me. Or if you pay me more, rather, because what the old emperors left me was not enough. That's what they did. And in fact, they sort of, when they rebelled, this particular legion, I mean, they were not the only ones. There were also some legions in the Danube that rebelled, so it's not about only here. But here in particular, what they thought they were going to be clever about is they thought, okay, I'm going to support Germanicus because it's quite popular, or so we are told, at least by the sources. It's quite popular. We're going to support him to become the new emperor against his uncle, who's actually not very popular. Not many people like him. Tiberius was thought to be quite solitary figure, not very charming, a bit too kind of cold, distant, and calculating. Although he was a great administrator and a great general too. But I don't know, like, sources do tell us a lot of things, and the whole book is actually about unraveling this and see how this myth of the charming prince Germanicus, there was a lot more going on there. But it remains the fact that these legions try it on with Germanicus, asking him to basically become the new emperor, because the whole point was that, again, the same story. I'm giving you allegiance. I'm going to make you the new emperor. You're going to be grateful, and you're going to pay me more. That didn't work out. Germanicus was very, very loyal to his uncle, to his family in general, to his ancestors, and it's kind of like it was kind of quashed quite early on.
Which is quite rare, because later on, whenever an emperor dies, gets killed, or, the Praetorian Guard don't get paid enough, and they just, the year of the year of the 5 emperors or the 4 emperors?
Yes, 69, yeah.
What tends to happen is, if you've got a legion, if you've got a force, you just sprint back to Rome before anybody else, so you can get there and go, right. And so the fact that he's got, if you like, morals, and we don't really think, or he's got principles, because he comes from this family.
Absolutely. And also, it might have been about character. Also, Germanicus was meant to inherit the empire anyway at some point, because it had been Augustus, the first emperor, had predisposed that Tiberius, when he adopted Tiberius as his heir, he predisposed Tiberius to adopt Germanicus as his own heir, which meant that at some point, Germanicus would have become emperor regardless. It's a bit more convoluted than that, but kind of like there were also, it was not meant to be the only one. Augustus always tried. Augustus was very clever in the sense he understood that this empire was too big. Referring back, like as you said before, how did they manage to control this whole thing? Augustus himself had understood that it was just a very big burden for just one person. So throughout his life, he's always tried to kind of reinstate this idea of having at least 2 people collaborating at the high top to at least sort of like, having one senior member, one junior, but already to kind of like divide the burden of governing such a vast amount of territory. And this kind of like trait carried on. Also, Tiberius carried it on. Tiberius had a natural son, another Drusus. We've got many Drususes going on here. And like the idea was that the empire would have then passed on to the 2 of them, who unfortunately died very young, both of them. So that didn't materialize. Now,
we've all talked about the men, and we've all been very macho, but one of the fascinating things about that is because, again, Germanicus is adopted, and this is quite a mind blower, because women have a really important role in this one, and they have what we would call agency, because they are absolutely, we tend to think of, the women just going, oh, bring me that gladiator for tonight, and I'll have another glass. Absolutely not the case. They are the power brokers in this one. I mean, it is really, really interesting.
Absolutely. The women of the Julio-Claudian family, as probably, to me, are the most fascinating ones, in the sense that, again, it was not clear. First of all, a lot of them were ambitious women. The most notorious one that we know is Agrippina, the mother of Nero. Agrippina, the mother of Nero, was the daughter of Germanicus. Her mother was another Agrippina, who was actually probably even more insidious to some extent than Agrippina, her daughter. So the wife of Germanicus, this Agrippina, is a very complex and fascinating figure. And to some extent, I'd say that a lot of what the sources tell us about Germanicus and about this whole clash with Tiberius, and Tiberius being jealous of Germanicus's popularity and being afraid of Germanicus rebelling and trying to seize on power, is actually all related to Agrippina. She was very conscious of who she was at that time, say around, when in the second decade of the first millennium AD, so like roughly 1020 AD, Agrippina was the last living granddaughter of Augustus. She was very conscious of who she was, and she strived in the following 20 years of her life to sort of reinstate like this idea of kind of like who she was for her family. Because she saw a lot of times Tiberius as an outsider. He was a Republican, he was a descendant from a Republican family. He was not the son of Augustus at the end of the day. He was not his blood, where she was. So again, very fascinating figure. Then we go Livia. Livia played a major role throughout. She's depicted as, again, like one of these sort of witches of the situation. But again, because later Roman historians did not understood that they did not understand who she was. What she was doing at the time was not clear cut, basically. Like later historians knew what an empress could or could not do, but these people didn't at the time.
Because, Herodotus notwithstanding, nobody is writing history at this point. So therefore, it's being written 300, 400 years later. They want to put a different angle on it as well. The women are, basically seen as being decorative rather than being king. And if you're a Roman mother or a Roman, queen mother or whatever, emperor's mother, you have to be very careful, because your life expectancy can be very short indeed if it all goes horribly wrong. So you kind of want to keep your son or your grandson or your relations really close and make sure that they get the top job, or they don't at least rebel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Agrippina the Younger, the mother of Nero, was not as lucky. She probably tried it a bit to kind of on. But this is what Agrippina, the wife of Germanicus, so the grandmother of Nero, tried to do, especially after Germanicus' death. So Germanicus had kind of like at least he had 3 male sons, and with them she tried on to kind of like give them the top job against Tiberius. That didn't work out. There was another powerful figure at the time who, again, is very shady. The sources tell us kind of like a lot of random things about him. Sejanus. So he was sort of the kick side, the right hand of Tiberius at the time. Again, seen as an upstart because he was not from a noble family. So there was a lot of friction with Agrippina herself, where she tried on again and again to basically displace Tiberius and have one of her sons, especially the firstborn son, to kind of like get over. Unfortunately, the whole period of this sort of conspiracy and then the downfall of Agrippina and her 2 eldest sons is very confused, in the sense that also we're lacking the main author of the whole story. Tacitus is actually not there. We're missing that bit, unfortunately. So we try our best to recreate with what we have, especially adding a lot of archaeological material and stuff, kind of what we call the material culture we can add up to things. But eventually her son, like one of her sons, became emperor eventually after Tiberius died, who is then infamous Caligula.
Yeah,
so,
by that. Yeah, and that's a very interesting period. So Germanicus then he's on the Rhine. Does he come back to Rome? I mean, because he is this obviously charismatic. His troops are with him. He's from the right family. He is, he is, if you like, number one candidate to run the empire. So why? I mean, he's 33 when he dies. Is he on the Rhine? Is he in Rome? And and what is the evidence that the people, the whispering campaign about his death is very sudden? Now, I know life is very short sometimes in this period, but explain a little bit about the circumstances behind his death then, and why, and what happens.
Sure. So it all pans out in around 5 years, really, from 14 to 19 AD when he actually died. So first he was on the Rhine. He kind of led a couple of campaigns in Germany itself, beyond the river. Then Tiberius recalled him to Rome. He was given a triumph. The sources tell us, again, because Tiberius was jealous about him and these kind of stuff, but it's kind of more evident that at the time in the East, so completely in kind of what is now modern day Turkey, more or less, like Eastern Turkey, in old Armenia, there had been trouble brewing. There was a very powerful kingdom in what is Iraq today called Parthia, that basically had always been a thorn in the side of Rome, what it was before and after it started becoming a thorn in the side with these people. So there was trouble brewing. Tiberius needed someone capable and trustworthy to manage this very delicate situation, very delicate diplomatic also situation. So Germanicus was sent with full powers, basically, second only to the one of the emperor, to the east. So he had a tour around some of the regions there. The sources tell us also that he went to Egypt, which apparently caused a huge clash with Tiberius. But it kind of like comes out more that it was probably done more on, how can I put it in very simple words, like there was a famine going on in Egypt, and Egypt was a very, very...
Egypt's the bread basket, isn't it? Egypt supplies for the whole of the empire. If you lose Egypt...
especially supplies to Rome.
Yeah.
And if food doesn't arrive in Rome and the people get upset, you may imagine what can happen. So there's this whole conundrum about Germanicus having gone to Egypt without the approval of the emperor, because no senator, Germanicus was a senator at the end of the day, he was from a senatorial family. No senator could enter Egypt without the approval of the emperor. So it's quite shady about here, but it definitely didn't cause as bad a rift as the extant sources want us to tell. And the issue, though, is that because Tacitus is a great mastermind here, he links this journey to Egypt immediately before Germanicus' death himself. Because apparently after this journey, Germanicus went back to Syria, where he was based, where the biggest city at the time was Antioch. And there he died in these sort of mysterious circumstances where kind of like a lot of people alleged to have been poisoned. This story about poisoning went on and on and on since the very early days, was later kind of recaptured by later historians like Tacitus, like Suetonius. And that's how he has arrived today to us. So this whole idea and conundrum that Tiberius allegedly had poisoned Germanicus because he was jealous of his popularity, because he was afraid that he was going to be unseated by the hand of this sort of another kind of like sidekick, Piso. Piso is senators, very disgruntled men from Rome that had received these secret orders by the emperor, being sent to the east to monitor Germanicus. They didn't get along very well and eventually allegedly killed him. Now, my whole book is about actually unraveling this whole thing. It's like, it's kind of saying, look, he didn't kill him. And even if he did, which he probably didn't anyway, it was not done on the emperor's orders. Furthermore, there is evidence anyway that in those years, a sort of plague, again, we call them plagues because we don't even know what they really are sometimes, but he was going around throughout the east of the empire and eventually reached Rome as well, meaning that Germanicus did probably die out there. His brother, Drusus, the other son of Tiberius, did die probably of it as well, very young, just a couple of years later. And guess what? He was told again, he had been poisoned because of these, and that. I mean, the whole story of poisoning is very recurrent and usually happens. If you think about dynasties, royal families, every time there's someone who dies early, or there's always something going on. And there will always be rumors that someone has died because he was has been killed because of jealousy, because of power hunger, and so on, basically. So,
and also, I mean, two things here, just quickly. Antonine Plague hits the whole of the Mediterranean. And they don't think, it's a pandemic. They think they've angered the gods. So therefore, that's the first one. And two, I mean, you just said, the Parthians. That's a massive superpower. It's not just a little rebellious territory on, it's not like the Brits. No. It is a huge superpower that is the biggest problem for Rome and will be the biggest problem for the Eastern Roman Empire.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
It was really the only kingdom that stood up to Rome in terms of the whole area, because the Germanic tribes were tribes. That's the whole point. It was very rare to have this sort of unifying figure like Arminius was, but there was nothing comparable in terms of organization and administration to a sort of kingdom to some extent. So Parthia was very important for this, and it was very delicate for this reason.
We've only got 3 minutes. How do you, because there are no historians writing at the time, but you're an archaeologist, how do you unravel this? How do you discover it? Because again, it's been written several centuries later, what people normally
sure.
Yeah.
So what I used a lot was because I brought in the kind of like the material record of the time. For example, I'll give you like a very concrete example for your listeners also to understand what I mean by this. There's this whole story that Tiberius was jealous of Germanicus, that he was afraid of being unseated by him, and also he wanted to promote his other biological son, Drusus. Okay? Now, if that had been the case, Tiberius would have not commissioned in Rome arches, monumental arches, which are not extant anymore, but which glorified both children. Same thing. From the provinces, although in the provinces, what happens is that it's not the emperor a lot of the time who commission things in the provinces, okay? It's the local gentry, nobility, if you want to call it like that, who kind of commissions these monuments, these artworks, in order to favor themselves with the emperor. It's sort of like, I'm in line with you. We celebrate who you are. We're going to do. So what does this mean, though? It means that you're doing something. If you know that the emperor or the imperial family are not going to like something, you're not going to do it, basically. And we've got plenty of examples from the provinces of bases of statues, for example, which represented Tiberius with his two sons, Germanicus and Drusus on one side. Now, again, if Tiberius wanted to probably promote only the one or two, why would you bother with the other, really? If that is not going to attract you the favor of the emperor in the mind of a local nobility, basically. So in Sconsa, and you see that on coins. Same thing. You've got the portraits of these two young guys facing each other. It's not only one. It's the two of them. So there's a plenty of kind of like evidence tells us. That tell us that in Tiberius's eyes there was no difference really. There was no difference at all. Exactly because Tiberius was a promoter of the idea of Augustus of having more people sharing the bird.
I could talk about this, as you can tell, until next week, but I'm going to run out of time. The book is called Germanicus, Rome's Unlucky Prince. It's by Alessio Perry. Alessio, if people want to find you online, do you have a website, social media? Where can they find you?
I do. Actually, I do. So you can find me on Facebook, on LinkedIn as well. But I also have my own website, which actually is called The Tuscan Tutor, where I actually do... Yes, because I do teach Italian too via that. But I do write occasional blogs too as well.
The book is called Germanicus, Rome's Unlucky Prince. It's by Alessio Perry. Alessio, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.